The conversation started like every other Sunday dinner we'd had for the past 3 years. There was the familiar clinking of silverware against plates, the aroma of Mom's pot roast filling the dining room, and that underlying tension that always seemed to simmer just beneath the surface of our family gatherings. I'd learned to anticipate it, that moment when casual conversation would shift into something sharper, something designed to remind me of exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Sarah had been talking for nearly 20 minutes straight, her phone propped against her water glass so everyone could see the slideshow of images she'd carefully curated. Her kitchen renovation was the star of today's show. Gleaming marble countertops stretched across the screen, their polished surfaces catching the light in a way that looked almost professionally photographed. Custom cabinets in a soft gray-blue lined the walls, and an intricate backsplash made of hand-laid subway tiles created a pattern that she'd spent months planning down to the smallest detail. "This is what real investment looks like," Sarah said, her voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction that I'd come to recognize over the years. She swiped to another photo, this one showing a close-up of the marble veining. "When you own property, when you're building equity month after month, you can actually create something meaningful. You're not just throwing money into a void with nothing to show for it." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting another piece of roast beef with deliberate care. Mom reached for the bowl of mashed potatoes and passed them to Dad, but not before giving Sarah an approving nod that made her whole face light up with maternal pride. "Sarah's always been the smart one when it comes to money," Mom said, spooning gravy over her potatoes. "She thinks about the future, about building wealth that will last. It's such an important quality to have." I took a bite of green beans and chewed slowly, letting the conversation wash over me the way I always did. This was my role in the family dynamic, the quiet one who listened while others talked, the one who absorbed criticism without pushing back, the one who'd somehow become the measuring stick for what not to do with your life. Dad cleared his throat, and I knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. He had that particular expression on his face, the one that meant he was about to deliver what he considered fatherly wisdom, but what usually felt more like a lecture disguised as concern. "Speaking of investments and building equity," Dad said, cutting into his steak with more force than the tender meat required. "Maybe it's time you started thinking seriously about your own future, Emma. You can't keep renting forever like you're still in college. At 29, most people who are serious about their careers and their financial futures are investing in real estate, building something permanent. They're not paying someone else's mortgage every single month." Sarah leaned back in her chair, and I could see the satisfaction spreading across her face. This was her favorite part, the moment when the family's attention shifted from admiring her success to discussing my apparent lack of it. "I totally get it," she said, her voice dripping with a sympathy that felt anything but sympathetic. "Not everyone has the credit score for a mortgage, or the down payment saved up. The requirements are pretty steep these days, especially in this market. But there are programs out there, first-time buyer assistance, things like that, even for people in your particular situation." The condescension in those last three words was so thick, I could almost taste it. Your particular situation. As if my life was some kind of unfortunate circumstance that required special assistance programs and lowered expectations. Uncle Robert, who'd been quietly working on his dinner up until this point, decided to add his contribution to the conversation. "The housing market is incredibly competitive right now," he said, shaking his head as if the very thought of it exhausted him. "You need substantial income, perfect credit, a significant down payment. It's definitely not for everyone. Some people just aren't cut out for that level of financial responsibility and commitment." I nodded politely, keeping my expression neutral. "You're probably right about that," I said, my standard response to these weekly assessments of my life choices. It was easier than arguing, simpler than trying to defend myself against assumptions that had been solidified over years of repetition. Sarah wasn't finished yet. She never was when she had an audience. "Don't get me wrong," she continued, gesturing with her fork for emphasis. "There's absolutely nothing wrong with renting. Some people just aren't cut out for the responsibilities that come with homeownership. The constant maintenance issues, the property taxes that seem to increase every year, the insurance premiums, the HOA fees, it's a lot to handle. And it requires a certain level of financial sophistication and long term planning. Mom reached over and patted my hand, her touch gentle, but her expression mixing concern with something that looked uncomfortably close to pity. Maybe you could start small, honey, she suggested, her voice soft and encouraging in that way that somehow made everything worse. A little condo or townhouse, something manageable. You could work your way up gradually, take it one step at a time. If she can even qualify for a mortgage, Dad muttered. Not quite under his breath, but not quite loud enough to be a direct statement either. Just loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability if I called him out on it. The dinner continued for another hour and a half, the conversation flowing through Sarah's recent promotion to senior marketing manager, her detailed 5-year plan to upgrade to an even larger house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage and an in-ground pool, and her thoughts on the best neighborhoods for long-term property value appreciation. I listened, occasionally nodding when someone addressed me directly, playing the role I'd perfected over the years. As we started clearing dishes and Mom began preparing dessert, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen while the others moved to the living room for coffee. The kitchen was quieter, more intimate, and I knew this conversation had been planned. Sarah had that look on her face, the one that meant she'd been waiting for the right moment to pull me aside. I hope you don't take what Dad said too personally, she said, loading plates into the dishwasher with practiced efficiency. He just wants to see you succeed, you know. Build something meaningful with your life. We all do, really. We're family, and we want the best for you. I know, I replied, rinsing a serving platter under warm water and watching the soap suds swirl down the drain. Sarah paused, turning to face me with an expression that she probably thought looked helpful but came across as patronizing. If you ever want some advice about getting pre-approved for a mortgage or connecting with a good real estate agent, I'm totally happy to help. I know this amazing woman who specializes in helping first-time buyers, especially those working with more limited budgets. She's very patient and understanding about different financial situations. I smiled and thanked her for the offer, maintaining the facade that had become as natural to me as breathing. The facade of the struggling younger sister who needed guidance, who needed help navigating a world she clearly didn't understand, as well as everyone else did. The drive home gave me time to think, to process the evening's conversation, and the familiar patterns that had emerged. The streets were quiet at this time of night, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for an audience of just a few scattered cars. I drove my 3-year-old Honda Civic through the city, passing the trendy restaurants and boutique shops that lined the main boulevard. And I thought about how these family dinners had followed the same basic script for years. Sarah would showcase her latest achievement or acquisition. The family would praise her financial acumen and forward-thinking approach to wealth building. And I would sit quietly while they discussed my apparent lack of ambition and questionable life choices, my failure to launch into proper adulthood, my contentment with a modest lifestyle that screamed underachiever to anyone paying attention. What they didn't know, what none of them had any idea about, was that I'd been paying Sarah's mortgage for the past 2 years, every single month, without fail. I'd been the one keeping her in that house she loved to show off, the one financing the equity she loved to lecture me about building. It had started small and innocuous, the way these things often do. Nothing dramatic, nothing that felt like a major decision at the time. Sarah had called me late one evening about 18 months after buying her house, and I could tell immediately from her voice that something was wrong. She was crying, really crying, not the delicate tears she sometimes produced for effect, but the kind of sobbing that came from genuine fear and desperation. "Emma, I don't know what to do," she'd said, her words coming out in gasps between sobs. "The pharmaceutical company is restructuring. They're eliminating my entire department. I'm going to lose my job, and I've got maybe 6 weeks of savings. 8 if I really stretch everything and cut back on expenses. The mortgage payment is $3,200 every month. I can't lose this house. Not after everything I went through to get it. All the sacrifice, all the planning. She'd begged me not to tell the family. Her carefully constructed image as the successful sister was everything to her, the foundation of her identity within our family dynamic. The thought of dad or mom knowing she couldn't afford her mortgage payments, that she was struggling financially, was absolutely unbearable to her. It would shatter the persona she'd worked so hard to create and maintain. So I helped. I saw it as a temporary solution to a short-term crisis, a bridge loan between jobs that would be repaid once she got back on her feet. I set up a monthly automatic transfer from my business account to hers, covering her $3,200 mortgage payment, while she focused on finding new employment and getting her career back on track. It was supposed to be brief, just a few months until she found another position and could resume normal payments. But then she found a new job that paid significantly less than her previous position. The marketing role at a smaller biotechnology company offered better long-term stability and growth potential, she'd explained. But it came with a substantial $30,000 annual pay cut that made her mortgage payments completely unmanageable on her new salary. She'd asked if I could continue the payments, just for a little while longer, just until she got promoted or found a higher-paying position elsewhere. She framed it as a temporary loan that she'd definitely pay back once her financial situation improved. That was over a year ago, and the payments had continued every month without interruption, without any discussion of repayment, without any acknowledgement at family dinners, that the equity she was building was being financed by the sister she loved to criticize. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. While Sarah delivered lectures about building equity and the long-term benefits of homeownership, while she showed off her marble countertops and custom cabinets, while she positioned herself as the financially savvy sister who had her life together, I was literally financing her version of the American dream. Every month, I transferred $3,200 to keep her afloat financially, while she basked in the family's admiration for her supposed financial success and planning capabilities. The consulting firm I supposedly worked for was actually a cover for my real business. It was easier to let people make assumptions than to explain the truth. Simpler to let them believe I worked at some small, unimpressive company than to detail the reality of what I'd built over the past 5 years. I owned a property management company, one that I'd started from scratch with a single duplex and grown into a portfolio of 17 rental properties scattered across the city. The properties generated enough passive income that I could afford to subsidize my sister's lifestyle without significantly affecting my own financial stability or long-term investment plans. My monthly rental income was substantial enough that Sarah's mortgage payment represented less than 10% of what I brought in each month. But explaining that reality would require revealing the entire web of lies and assumptions that had become the foundation of our family dynamic. Sarah couldn't admit she was struggling financially without destroying her carefully maintained image. And I'd grown tired of trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I was the family disappointment, the one who couldn't get her life together, the one who needed advice and guidance and patient explanations about how the real world worked. Monday morning brought my usual routine. I woke up early, made coffee in my modest one-bedroom apartment, and settled at my desk to review the overnight reports from my property manager. Janet had sent the weekly summary, a detailed breakdown of rental income, maintenance schedules, and tenant issues that needed attention. My 17 properties were performing well. Occupancy rates were above 95%, and rental income continued to increase with market rates. The Riverside property, a 3-bedroom house in a desirable neighborhood near the university, had just become available, and Janet reported strong interest from potential tenants. The Riverside property is getting multiple applications from qualified tenants, Janet said during our weekly call, her voice professional and efficient. 3 different candidates, all offering above the listed rent. We could probably get $2,800 instead of the advertised $2,600. Maybe even $2,900 if we're selective about who we choose. I approved the increase and moved on to reviewing expense reports for recent renovations on a duplex downtown. The numbers were solid, the returns were strong, and the business was thriving. Better than thriving, actually. The strong real estate market meant my properties were appreciating in value, while generating steady rental income that I reinvested in additional acquisitions. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah, pulling my attention away from the spreadsheet on my screen. "Thanks again for dinner last night. Mom absolutely loved seeing the whole family together like that. By the way, I'm super excited about the new backsplash. Already thinking about redoing the master bathroom next. You know how home improvement projects go. There's always something else to update." I stared at the message for a long moment, processing the casual tone and the mention of another expensive renovation project. The bathroom upgrade would probably cost another $15,000 to $20,000. Money she didn't have, money that would inevitably be financed through credit cards or personal loans that she'd struggle to repay on her reduced salary. That evening, I made a decision that had been building in my mind for months. The weight of it had been growing heavier with each family dinner, with each lecture about financial responsibility, with each condescending comment about my life choices. I'd reached a breaking point, and I knew that continuing down this path would only breed more resentment and enable more of Sarah's financial irresponsibility. I called Janet first, my voice steady and businesslike despite the nervousness I felt about what I was about to set in motion. "I need you to stop processing the monthly payment from Sarah Matthews for the Riverside property effective immediately. The $3,200 monthly transfer that's been coming through automatically." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this?" Janet asked, her tone professional but concerned. "I can set up a different payment method if there's an issue with the current banking setup. We can switch to a different account or change the transfer date if that would help." "No," I said firmly, my decision crystallizing as I spoke the words out loud. "Stop accepting any payments from her entirely, starting next month. No more transfers, no more arrangements." Janet was confused, but she maintained her professional demeanor. She'd been working with me long enough to know that I didn't make impulsive decisions about business matters. "Understood completely. Should I send formal notice about the payment discontinuation, or will you be handling all communications directly?" "I'll handle all notifications myself," I told her, already mentally preparing for the conversation I knew I needed to have with Sarah. Next, I called my accountant to discuss the tax implications of discontinuing the arrangement. The monthly payments to Sarah had been structured as family loans rather than rental income, which had simplified the documentation and reporting requirements. My accountant confirmed that stopping the payments wouldn't create any tax complications, and we discussed the best way to document the change for my records. The hardest call was to Sarah herself. I sat at my desk for several minutes, staring at her contact information on my phone, screen, trying to find the right words for a conversation I knew would be difficult and painful. Finally, I pressed the call button and listened to the ringing, my heart pounding harder with each tone. "Emma, what's up?" Sarah answered cheerfully, her voice bright with the confidence of someone who believed her financial support was guaranteed indefinitely, who had no reason to think anything was about to change. "We need to talk about the monthly mortgage payments," I said without any preamble or small talk. There was no point in easing into this conversation or trying to soften the blow with pleasantries. Her voice immediately became cautious and uncertain, the brightness fading into something more guarded. "What about them? Is there some kind of problem with the transfer system? Did something not go through?" "They're stopping. Next month will be the last payment." Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds, broken only by the sound of Sarah's breathing becoming more rapid and shallow. I could hear the panic building even through the phone line, could imagine the expression on her face as she processed what I just said. "What do you mean stopping?" she finally asked, her voice rising with desperation. "Emma, I can't afford the full mortgage payment on my own. You know that. My current salary isn't nearly enough to cover it, plus all the other monthly expenses. The utilities, the HOA fees, the property taxes. I thought we had an understanding, an arrangement that worked for both of us." "We did have an arrangement," I said calmly, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning inside me. "For 24 months. But I can't continue subsidizing your lifestyle indefinitely. It's not fair to either of us. But I'm finally starting to get ahead financially, she protested, her words tumbling out faster now. The bathroom renovation will add significant value to the house. It's a smart investment that will pay for itself when I eventually sell. And I'm really hoping for a promotion next year that could bump my salary back up to where it was before, maybe even higher. I just need a little more time to get everything properly sorted out and stabilized. I listened patiently as she explained why this particular moment wasn't good timing, how she just needed a few more months to get her finances in order. The same explanations and promises I'd been hearing for 24 consecutive months. The same assurances that things would change soon, that she'd be able to take over the payments herself any day now. Sarah, I said, cutting through her increasingly desperate explanations. I can't keep subsidizing your mortgage while you lecture me about financial responsibility and the importance of building equity. Do you understand how hypocritical that is? How it feels to sit at family dinners while you give me advice about buying property when I'm the one paying for yours? What are you talking about? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I never lecture you about money or anything like that. I'm just trying to be supportive and helpful, trying to share what I've learned from my own experience. Last night at dinner, you spent over an hour explaining why I should buy property and build equity instead of throwing money away on rent every month. You talked about how some people just aren't cut out for the responsibilities of home ownership. You offered to connect me with a real estate agent who works with people in my particular situation. Another long pause as the implications sank in. That's completely different, though, she said, her voice becoming smaller and more defensive. I was just trying to help, give you some friendly advice based on my own experience with home ownership. Advice about home ownership and building wealth while I pay your mortgage every month. Do you see the problem here? Her voice became even smaller. You know I appreciate everything you've done for me. I can't lose this house, Emma. It would absolutely destroy me professionally and personally. And if the family found out that I've been struggling financially, that I couldn't actually afford this place on my own, I don't know what I'd do. It would be humiliating. That's not my problem to solve anymore, I said firmly, my resolve strengthening with each word. You have 30 days to figure out how to cover your mortgage payment without my financial support. The conversation ended badly, with Sarah crying and making increasingly desperate promises about revised repayment schedules and more realistic timelines for financial independence. She begged me to reconsider, to give her just a few more months, to think about what this would mean for her life and her standing in the family. But I held firm, knowing that if I backed down now, nothing would ever change. The cycle would continue indefinitely, with me funding her lifestyle while she criticized mine. I felt guilty about her distress. Despite everything, despite the years of condescension and criticism, she was still my sister, and hearing her cry was painful. But I also felt relieved that the charade was finally ending. The pretense had gone on far too long, and continuing it would only make things worse for both of us. 3 days later, Sarah called an emergency family meeting. Her text message had been brief and dramatic, the kind of message designed to create worry and ensure everyone would show up. I need to tell everyone something really important. Please come to Mom and Dad's house Thursday evening. It's urgent. When we gathered at Mom and Dad's house Thursday evening, Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch with red-rimmed eyes and a tissue clutched in her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept much over the past few days, and there was a fragility to her that I'd never seen before. The carefully constructed confidence had crumbled, leaving behind someone who looked scared and vulnerable. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mom asked immediately, her maternal instincts activated by Sarah's obvious distress. She sat down next to Sarah and put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close in a protective gesture. Sarah took a shaky breath and looked around the room at all of us. Dad was sitting in his favorite chair. Uncle Robert had claimed the recliner, and I stood near the doorway, not quite ready to commit to a seat. The tension in the room was palpable, everyone waiting to hear what could possibly be so urgent. "I've been having some serious financial difficulties," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. more significant than I've let on to anyone. The truth is, I can't afford my mortgage payments on my current salary, and I've been getting financial help to keep the house. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. What kind of help? Did you take out a second mortgage? A personal loan from the bank? Sarah shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Emma has been paying my entire mortgage for the past 2 years. Every month, $3,200. She's been covering my complete housing costs since I lost my first job after buying the house. The room went completely silent, as if all the air had been suddenly sucked out of the space. I could see the shock registering on everyone's faces, the mental calculations as they tried to process this information and reconcile it with everything they thought they knew about both of us. Uncle Robert was the first to find his voice. Emma, but you're not, he stopped himself, struggling to complete the sentence. Own property, have a successful career, make enough money to help anyone else? I filled in the blanks he was struggling with, my voice calm and measured. Right. That's what everyone assumed. Mom looked completely bewildered, as if the fundamental assumptions about our family had suddenly been turned upside down. How could you possibly afford to pay Sarah's mortgage? She asked, her voice filled with genuine confusion. Your job at that little consulting firm, it can't pay that much, can it? My consulting firm manages $12 million in residential real estate assets, I said, letting the number hang in the air for a moment. I personally own 17 rental properties throughout the city. Sarah's mortgage payment represents approximately 8% of my monthly rental income. The revelation hit the room like an explosion. Sarah was crying quietly, embarrassed by the public exposure of her financial dependence. Dad's face had gone through several distinct color changes as he processed the information that completely contradicted everything he thought he knew about my financial situation. Uncle Robert looked like someone had just told him the sky was actually green and grass was blue. 17 properties, Uncle Robert repeated weakly, as if saying the words might make them make more sense, might help them fit into his understanding of reality. Started with a duplex 5 years ago, I explained, my voice remaining calm and professional. Used the rental income to qualify for investor loans on additional properties. Pretty standard wealth building strategy in real estate investment. Nothing particularly complicated or innovative about it. Janet had prepared a portfolio summary for exactly these kinds of situations. A single-page document that showed property locations, acquisition dates, current market values, and monthly rental income in a clean, professional format. I pulled it from my purse and placed it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. Dad picked up the document with visibly shaking hands, his eyes scanning the numbers with an expression of disbelief. This says your properties are worth over $4.2 million in total market value. Current market assessment, I confirmed matter-of-factly, though property values have been rising pretty consistently over the past 18 months. So that number is probably conservative at this point. The actual value is likely higher. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue, her embarrassment now mixed with something that looked like resentment. I never meant for it to go on this long, she said, her voice breaking. I kept thinking I'd get a better job or a significant promotion or something that would let me pay Emma back and handle the mortgage payments myself. But it just kept not happening, and the months kept going by. Why didn't you tell us Emma was helping you financially? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her confusion evident in every word. Because you all think she's the family failure, Sarah snapped, her embarrassment suddenly turning to defensive anger. Every single family dinner is about how successful I am and how Emma needs to get her life together and start making better choices. How was I supposed to explain that the successful sister needed financial support from the unsuccessful one? That everything you all admired about my life was being paid for by the person you all felt sorry for? The room fell quiet again as everyone absorbed the full implications of what had been revealed. The carefully constructed narrative of our family dynamic had been completely shattered, and no one seemed quite sure how to process the new reality. So when you've been giving me advice about building equity and buying property, I said to Sarah, letting the sentence hang in the air unfinished. "I know exactly how it sounds," she said miserably, fresh tears streaming down her face. I wanted to keep up the image. You know? I worked so incredibly hard to buy that house. It was supposed to prove that I had my life together, that I was successful and responsible. And when I couldn't afford it anymore, when I lost my job and couldn't find anything that paid as well, I couldn't bear to admit failure to everyone. I couldn't face the disappointment and the judgment. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly, his expression a mixture of shame and confusion. "Emma, I owe you a serious apology. We all do. We've been completely wrong about your situation for years. Completely wrong about so many things. Wrong about a lot of things," I agreed, my voice remaining calm and measured despite the emotions churning inside me. "But why didn't you ever say anything?" Mom asked, her confusion genuine and painful to witness. "All these years of us thinking you were struggling financially, making assumptions about your career, offering you advice and feeling concerned about your future. Why did you let us believe all of that?" "Because it didn't matter what any of you thought about my success," I said simply. "I didn't need your approval or recognition to build a profitable business. The properties perform well regardless of whether you know about them or not. But I did get tired of funding Sarah's lifestyle while she lectured me about financial responsibility. That part became impossible to ignore." Uncle Robert was still staring at the property portfolio document, his finger tracing down the list of addresses and values. "You've been carrying all of this financial success quietly for years while we what? Made assumptions? Offered unsolicited advice? Treated you like someone who needed our help and guidance? Treated me like the family disappointment," I finished for him. "Yes. Why didn't you just tell us?" Dad asked, his voice carrying a note of frustration. "If you were doing so well, if you'd built this successful business, why keep it a secret?" "Real estate investment isn't particularly dramatic or exciting," I said with a shrug. "You buy properties, maintain them properly, collect rent, and reinvest the profits. It's boring and steady, which doesn't make for exciting dinner conversation. And honestly, after a while, it became easier to let you all make assumptions than to constantly defend my choices or explain my business model to people who'd already decided I was making mistakes with my life." Sarah looked up from her tissues, her eyes red and swollen. "What happens now? With the house, I mean. What am I supposed to do?" "That's your problem to solve," I said firmly, my resolve not wavering despite the pain in her voice. "You have 30 days to figure out how to cover your mortgage payment without my financial support. That's what I told you on the phone, and that hasn't changed." "But I can't afford it on my current salary," she protested, her voice rising with desperation. "You know that's impossible. The numbers don't work. Even if I cut back on everything else, I still can't cover $3,200 a month plus all the other expenses." "Then sell the house," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Downsize to something you can actually afford on your income, or find a way to increase your earnings. Get a second job, find a higher paying position, take on freelance work. But I'm not subsidizing your lifestyle anymore. That chapter is over." The family meeting ended with a lot of uncomfortable silence and half-hearted apologies that felt more obligatory than genuine. Dad promised to be more supportive and less judgmental in the future, though his voice lacked conviction. Mom insisted she'd always believed in my potential despite all evidence to the contrary, which we both knew wasn't entirely true. Uncle Robert asked for investment advice, which felt particularly ironic given his previous commentary about my financial prospects and capabilities. Over the following weeks, Sarah explored her limited options with growing desperation. She listed the house for sale, contacted a real estate agent, and started looking at smaller condos and townhouses that would fit within her actual budget. The elaborate bathroom renovation plans were quietly abandoned, along with several other home improvement projects she'd been planning and discussing at family dinners. The hardest adjustment for her seemed to be accepting the reality of living within her actual means. For 2 full years, my financial support had allowed her to maintain a lifestyle that significantly exceeded her income. She'd been able to keep up appearances, to maintain the image of success that meant so much to her, to avoid facing the truth about her financial situation. Without that safety net, she was forced to make real choices about spending priorities and lifestyle expectations. The house showings began almost immediately. Sarah's real estate agent, a efficient woman named Michelle, scheduled back-to-back appointments with potential buyers. Each showing required Sarah to make the house look perfect, to hide any evidence of the financial stress she'd been under, to present the property as a well-maintained home owned by someone who'd made smart investment decisions. I helped her prepare for the showings, not because I felt obligated to, but because, despite everything, she was still my sister. We cleaned and organized, staged rooms to look their best, and made minor repairs that would help the house show well. During those hours of working side by side, we talked more honestly than we had in years. "I'm sorry," Sarah said one afternoon while we were touching up paint in the living room. "For all of it. The lectures about financial responsibility, the condescending advice, the way I let everyone treat you at family dinners. I was so focused on maintaining this image of success that I couldn't see how hypocritical and cruel I was being." "I know," I said, dipping my brush in the paint can. "But you needed to hit bottom before you could start climbing back up. As long as I was cushioning the fall, you had no incentive to change anything." At the next family dinner, the entire dynamic had shifted dramatically. Instead of Sarah showing off expensive home improvement projects and dispensing financial advice, the conversation focused on her house hunting process and plans for downsizing to a more manageable living situation. There was a vulnerability to her that hadn't been there before, a willingness to admit struggle and uncertainty that made her seem more human and less like the perfect success story she'd always tried to project. Dad asked thoughtful questions about my real estate business operations, genuinely interested in understanding how I'd built such a successful portfolio so quietly. "Walk me through how you got started," he said during dessert. "I'm trying to understand how you went from that first duplex to 17 properties in just 5 years." I explained the process, the careful research and planning that had gone into each acquisition, the way rental income from existing properties had helped me qualify for loans on additional purchases, the importance of maintaining good relationships with tenants, and staying on top of maintenance issues. It felt strange to be talking openly about my business with family members who'd spent years assuming I was struggling financially. Mom wanted to understand how I'd managed to build such a successful portfolio while living so modestly. "You could afford a much nicer apartment," she said, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than criticism. "A luxury condo or a house of your own. Why do you live in that one-bedroom place?" "Because I don't need much personal space," I explained patiently. "My money goes toward acquiring income-producing assets, not lifestyle inflation or impressing other people. Every dollar I don't spend on unnecessary luxuries is a dollar I can invest in another property, another source of passive income." "But you could afford a lot of things," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful. "A nicer car, expensive clothes, fancy vacations. Why not enjoy some of your success?" "I could afford a lot of things," I agreed. "That doesn't mean I should buy them just because I can. There's a difference between being able to afford something and it being a smart financial decision. I'd rather build long-term wealth than impress people with short-term purchases." The conversation that evening was fundamentally different from all the family dinners that had come before. It was more honest, less performative, with genuine curiosity replacing the previous pattern of subtle competition and judgment. Sarah was still adjusting to her new financial reality, but she seemed somewhat relieved to drop the exhausting pretense of effortless success. A month later, Sarah found a qualified buyer for her house. The sale price was strong, benefiting from the hot real estate market. And after paying off her mortgage and settling her accumulated credit card debt, she had enough left over for a down payment on a smaller condo and a modest emergency fund for future unexpected expenses. The new condo was in a different neighborhood, less prestigious but more practical. It was a two-bedroom unit in a well-maintained building with reasonable HOA fees and property taxes that Sarah could actually afford on her salary. The day she closed on the purchase, I helped her move in, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and helping her decide where furniture should go. It's actually really nice, Sarah said, standing in the middle of her new living room and looking around with an expression that mixed relief with acceptance. Smaller, obviously. But I don't have to constantly worry about affording the monthly payments anymore. And no more pretending to be something I'm not financially. That was exhausting in ways I didn't even realize until it stopped. It's a good space, I agreed, helping her unpack kitchen boxes. And it's actually yours, paid for with your money, not dependent on someone else's support. The family dynamics continued to evolve gradually over the following months. Dad started asking for my opinion on financial matters and investment strategies, genuinely valuing my expertise rather than assuming I needed his guidance. Mom seemed genuinely interested in understanding how I'd built my business so successfully, asking detailed questions about property management and tenant relations. Uncle Robert, perhaps most transformed by the revelation, had become almost deferential in his interactions with me. He asked for advice about his own retirement planning, wanted to know if real estate investment made sense for someone his age, and apologized repeatedly for his previous dismissive comments about my financial prospects. But the biggest change was in my relationship with Sarah. Without the financial dependence and the constant need to maintain false appearances, we could finally be completely honest with each other about our respective situations. She was working diligently on rebuilding her financial stability and independence, applying for higher paying positions, and taking on freelance marketing projects to supplement her income. I was learning to be more open about my successes and long term goals, no longer hiding my achievements to avoid uncomfortable conversations or maintain a facade of struggling. It felt liberating to talk honestly about my business, to share my plans for future acquisitions, to admit that I enjoyed the challenge of building wealth through strategic property investment. The Sunday dinners became more balanced conversations, with everyone contributing their perspectives rather than one person dominating with carefully curated achievement stories. Sarah talked openly about her job search for a position with better compensation, about the challenges of adjusting to a smaller living space, about learning to live within her means without feeling like a failure. I shared updates about property acquisitions and market trends, about the satisfaction of building a business from scratch, about the importance of long-term planning over short-term gratification. The conversations felt more genuine, more connected, less like performances designed to prove something to each other. I still feel absolutely terrible about all those years of taking your money while simultaneously criticizing your life choices, Sarah said during one of our private conversations several months after she'd moved into her condo. We were having coffee at a small cafe near her new place, sitting by the window and watching people walk by on the street outside. It taught me something valuable, I replied thoughtfully, stirring sugar into my coffee. Family support shouldn't come with strings attached or expectations of gratitude performances. But it also shouldn't enable people to avoid facing reality indefinitely. There's a difference between helping someone through a genuine temporary crisis and subsidizing their permanent lifestyle choices that exceed their actual means. When did you know you had to stop? Sarah asked, her voice genuinely curious. When you started planning another expensive renovation while still depending on my money for your basic housing costs, I said. That's when I realized you weren't treating my support as temporary assistance, but as a permanent income source that you'd incorporated into your lifestyle expectations. Sarah nodded slowly, processing this. I did that, didn't I? I just assumed you'd keep paying forever, that I could keep living the same lifestyle indefinitely, without ever having to face the reality of what I could actually afford. You did, I agreed, and I enabled it by not setting clear boundaries earlier. I should have established a specific timeline from the beginning, made it clear that this was temporary assistance with a definite end date, not an open-ended arrangement. The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics we'd never discussed openly before. Sarah admitted that losing her first job had been devastating, not just financially but emotionally, that it had shaken her confidence in ways she'd never fully acknowledged. She'd bought the house as proof that she was successful, that she had her life together, and losing the ability to afford it had felt like admitting failure. I tied my entire sense of self-worth to that house, she said, her voice quiet and reflective. When I couldn't afford it anymore, when I had to ask you for help, I felt like I was admitting that I wasn't the successful person I'd worked so hard to become. So I hid it, pretended everything was fine, and convinced myself that it was just temporary. But it wasn't temporary, I said gently. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to face the truth. I know, Sarah said, tears gathering in her eyes. And I'm sorry for all of it, for the hypocrisy, for the lectures, for letting you pay for my life while I criticized yours. You deserved better than that. Sarah's house sale closed on a Tuesday afternoon in November. The weather had turned cold, and fallen leaves covered the sidewalks in shades of orange and brown. That evening, she sent me a text message that made me smile. First mortgage payment on the condo, paid entirely from my own account. Feels absolutely amazing. Thank you for everything you did and for finally saying no when you needed to. The message felt like closure on a chapter that had defined our relationship for far too long. Sarah was learning to live authentically within her means, building a life based on her actual financial reality, rather than the image she wanted to project. I was learning to set appropriate boundaries that protected both my financial resources and my emotional well-being. The family had adjusted to a completely new understanding of everyone's actual circumstances and capabilities. No more assumptions about success or failure, based purely on outward appearances or lifestyle choices. No more lectures about financial responsibility from someone who couldn't afford their own supposedly successful lifestyle. Most importantly, no more monthly transfers to maintain someone else's carefully constructed illusion of prosperity, while being treated as the family disappointment who couldn't get her life together. That felt definitely worth celebrating. The holidays that year were different. Christmas dinner at Mom and Dad's house had a warmth and authenticity that had been missing from our family gatherings for years. Sarah brought wine and stories about her new job search, talking openly about salary negotiations and the challenges of finding the right fit. I brought updates about a new property acquisition, a 4-unit apartment building that had come on the market at an attractive price. Tell us about the new building, Dad said over dinner, his interest genuine and engaged. What made you decide to go for a larger property this time? I explained the investment thesis, the way multi-unit properties offered better returns through economies of scale, the importance of location and tenant demographics. The conversation flowed naturally, without the undercurrent of judgment and competition that had poisoned so many previous family dinners. Uncle Robert asked intelligent questions about property management and maintenance costs. Mom wanted to know about my plans for future expansion. Sarah listened with an expression that mixed pride with something that looked like relief. Relief that she no longer had to pretend, that she could just be herself without maintaining an elaborate facade. As we cleared dishes after dinner, Sarah pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying a depth of emotion that words couldn't fully express. "For helping me when I needed it, and for stopping when I needed that too. I'm in a much better place now, financially and emotionally. I couldn't have gotten here without both of those things." "You're welcome," I said, giving her a hug. "I'm proud of you for facing reality and making the changes you needed to make. That took courage." "I'm proud of you too," she said, pulling back to look at me. "For building something amazing while everyone underestimated you. For having the strength to set boundaries when you needed to. For being a better person than I deserved during all those years of criticism." The evening ended with coffee and dessert in the living room. Everyone gathered around the fireplace sharing stories and laughter. The family dynamic had fundamentally shifted, transformed by honesty and the willingness to see each other as we actually were, rather than the roles we'd been playing. As I drove home that night, navigating the quiet streets in my modest Honda Civic, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. The revelation of my property portfolio and Sarah's financial dependence had shattered comfortable assumptions and forced everyone to reevaluate their understanding of success and failure. But more than that, It had freed us all from the exhausting performance of pretending to be something we weren't. Sarah no longer had to maintain the illusion of effortless success. I no longer had to hide my achievements to avoid uncomfortable conversations. The family no longer had to maintain their carefully constructed narrative about who was successful and who was struggling. The truth, as painful as it had been to reveal, had ultimately brought us closer together. We could finally see each other clearly, without the distortions of assumption and pretense. And in that clarity, we'd found the possibility of genuine connection and mutual respect. My phone buzzed with another message from Sarah as I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. Next family dinner is at my place. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad. But it's mine, paid for with my own money, and that feels like something worth celebrating. I smiled and typed back my response. I'll be there. And I'm bringing dessert. The journey from secret financial supporter to openly successful business owner had been longer and more complicated than I'd ever imagined. But standing on the other side of that revelation, I knew it had been necessary. The pretense had been poisoning our family relationships, creating resentment and enabling unhealthy patterns that would have only gotten worse over time. By finally telling the truth, by setting boundaries and refusing to continue subsidizing Sarah's lifestyle, I'd forced a reckoning that had ultimately made us all stronger and more honest. The family disappointment had turned out to be the most financially successful member of the family, and that reality had challenged everyone's assumptions about success, responsibility, and the importance of living authentically within your means. As I settled into my modest one-bedroom apartment that evening, surrounded by the simple furnishings and minimal possessions that reflected my priorities, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for years. I didn't need a marble countertop or custom cabinets to prove my worth. I didn't need my family's approval or recognition to validate my success. I had 17 income-producing properties, a thriving business, and a clear vision for my financial future. And now, finally, I also had honest relationships with my family members, built on truth rather than pretense, on mutual respect rather than assumptions and judgment. That felt like the greatest success of all.